Have you ever met someone and the moment you looked at them you felt they were strangely mature, too calm, too understanding, always knowing what to say, what to do, to keep things from getting worse? People usually praise them for it. This kid is so mature, they think like an adult, they're stronger than their age. But there is a truth that very few people realize. Most children who grow up too fast do not grow that way because they are special. They grow that way because they have no choice. It usually begins very quietly. There is no dramatic moment, no alarm bell. Just one day, a child begins to realize that the adults around them are not okay. You can imagine a scene like this. A 7-year-old child sitting in the living room. It is dark outside. Inside the house, it is silent. The father is sitting in a chair, his eyes red from alcohol. Or the mother is staring blankly at the wall, too exhausted to speak. No one explains anything. No one says, everything will be okay. But in the child's mind, something begins to shift. A very simple thought. If I do not keep everything stable, everything might fall apart. And from that moment, something very strange happens. The child begins to observe the world like an adult. They begin to pay attention to the tone of adults' voices, begin to read facial expressions, begin to guess everyone's mood before saying anything at all. If father is irritated, it is best to stay quiet. If mother is sad, it is best to be better behaved than usual. Little by little, the child learns a skill that no one ever taught them. That skill is reading the emotions of an entire room. Many adults call that being perceptive. But in truth, it is a survival mechanism. Because when you grow up in an environment where adult emotions can explode at any moment, you learn to detect the signs before the storm arrives. You notice things other people do not notice. A sigh, an annoyed look, a door shutting harder than usual. To others, those are just small details, but to that child, they are danger signals. And so the child begins to do something very unusual. They become the emotional regulator of the whole family. They try to make everyone happy. They try to keep everything peaceful. They try not to become a problem. If mother is sad, they comfort her. If father is angry, they go quiet. If the house feels tense, they try to become the good child. From the outside, people will see a very sweet child, not causing trouble, not talking back, not asking for much. But there is one thing no one sees. That child is slowly disappearing. Not disappearing from the world, but disappearing from themselves. They smile more, but cry less. Not because they are not sad, but because they have learned that their feelings are not the priority. There is a sentence many adults heard when they were children. Don't bother the adults. Stop crying. You need to be understanding. It sounds normal enough, but when a child hears those words too many times, they begin to believe that their emotions are a problem, and so they begin to hide them. An 8-year-old girl may see her mother crying in the kitchen. Instead of running over and saying that she is scared, she will say, "Mom, don't be sad anymore." A 9-year-old boy may see his father angry after a day of work. Instead of asking his father to play with him, he will quietly go to his room. Not because he does not want to be close to his father, but because he does not want to make everything worse. This is the moment that psychology describes as a very specific process, parentification, a reversal of the parental role. It means the child begins doing emotional labor that adults should have been doing for them. They become the caretaker, the peacemaker, the listener. There are 10-year-old children who have already begun listening to their mother talk about marital problems. There are 11-year-old children who have to stand between two adults who are arguing. There are children still very young, but already feeling that it is their job to keep the family from falling apart. And the most heartbreaking part is society often praises them for it. People say, "That girl is so understanding. With that boy matured early, he's stronger than his age." But very few people ask one very important question. If a child has to be strong that early, then whoever gave them permission to be weak? Because the truth is this: no child is born wanting to become an adult. They only want to play. They want to run around. They want to laugh freely without having to think about whether someone else is sad or angry. But when a child grows up in an environment where adult emotions are too heavy, they will do something that very few people notice. They will give up a part of their childhood. No one forces them with words. But the circumstances make them do it on their own. They become the good child, not because they are perfect, but because they are trying to keep everything from collapsing. And that is where the real tragedy begins. Because when a child learns how to become an adult too early, they may grow into a very capable adult. But deep inside, there is still a part of them whispering a question that was never answered. Why was it that when I was little, no one protected me? The scariest part of growing up too fast is not what happened in childhood. It is the way it quietly follows you for the rest of your life. Because when a child has to constantly monitor adult emotions in order to survive, their brain begins to change. It learns a state that psychologists call hypervigilance, excessive vigilance. It may sound like it is just being sensitive, but in reality, it is much deeper than that. It is when your nervous system is always scanning for danger, even when there is no danger. You walk into a room. Before you realize it, your brain has already read everything. Who is irritated? Who is tense? Who might become angry? You do not do it on purpose. It happens automatically, like a radar. A lot of people who grew up in normal environments do not understand this. They can sit in a room and simply think, what should I eat today? What do I have to do tomorrow? But for someone who grew up too fast, their brain may be thinking, that person seems irritated. Something feels off. What should I say so things do not get worse? And the strange thing is, most of the time they are right, because they spent their whole childhood practicing that skill. A very simple example. There are people who can tell someone's mood just by hearing the way they close a door. If the door closes hard, they immediately feel tense. Not because of the door, but because in the past, sounds like that usually came right before an emotional storm, an argument, an outburst of anger, or a heavy atmosphere that lasted the whole evening. So their body learned one thing: get ready. What does this mean? It means that even after you have become an adult, your nervous system still functions as if you were living in the old environment. You may be in a very peaceful room, but your body still feels tense. You may be in a safe relationship, but a part of you is still waiting for everything to fall apart. This is why many people who grew up too fast feel something that is very hard to explain. They are not used to peace. Peace makes them uncomfortable. It sounds paradoxical, but imagine this. If you grew up in a house where every night carried tension, then chaos becomes the familiar state. It is like background noise, always there. And when one day everything becomes quiet, your brain does not think, oh, this feels nice. It thinks something is wrong. Because in the past, silence often came right before something bad happened. That is why many people say something they do not even understand themselves. I don't know why, but when everything is too peaceful, I feel anxious. That is not weakness. That is your nervous system functioning the way it was trained to function. But the story does not stop there. When a child has to constantly regulate adult emotions, they learn a very dangerous lesson, that love is an exchange. If I am good, they will stay calm. If I am understanding, they will not get angry. If I do not cause trouble, everything will be okay. And so the child begins to believe this. Love is not something I simply receive. It is something I have to earn. You can see this very clearly when those children grow up. They often become extremely responsible people. They work hard. They try not to bother anyone. They are always ready to help. People often say about them, this person is wonderful. They always care about others. But inside them, there is something very few people know. They often feel that if they are not doing something useful, then they have no value. A woman may work 12 hours a day, not because she is ambitious, but because when she stops, a very strange feeling appears, the feeling that she does not deserve to rest. A man may always help all of his friends, always listening, always solving problems for others. But when he is struggling, he does not know who to turn to. Not because there is no one, but because deep in his mind, there is a very old belief, I should not become a burden. This is something many children who matured early carry into adulthood. They become people who give a great deal, but do not know how to receive. If someone helps them, they feel uncomfortable. If someone takes care of them, they feel indebted. If someone loves them, a part of them still thinks, have I done enough to deserve this yet? But there is another consequence, one that goes even deeper. Children who grow up too fast often learn how to disappear emotionally because when they were little, their emotions often had no room. If they were sad, the adults were too busy. If they were scared, the adults were too tired. If they cried, the adults might become irritated, so they learn a very subtle skill. They become very good at hiding their emotions, so good that when they grow up, they do not even know anymore what they are feeling. You may meet someone like that. They are very calm, very controlled, very logical. But if you ask them a very simple question, how are you feeling? They may not know how to answer, not because they have no emotions, but because they spent their whole childhood turning down their volume. And deep inside them, there is still a child waiting for something they never received, not money, not success. Just one very simple question, are you okay? And perhaps the most painful part is this. So many of us grow up without ever being asked that question. There is something very strange that happens when children who grew up too fast become adults. From the outside, they often look very fine, and sometimes they even look finer than most people. They may study very well, work very hard, be responsible, be disciplined, and rarely bother anyone. They are exactly the kind of people society likes. Bosses like them, friends trust them, their families are proud of them. But there is a truth very few people see. Behind that stable adult, there is often a child who was never truly cared for the right way. And that child does not disappear. They are simply buried deeper. When you were little, you did not have many choices. You had to adapt to the situation. If the family was chaotic, you had to become calm. If the adults were weak, you had to become strong. If no one listened, you had to silence yourself. Those mechanisms helped you survive, but when you grow up, the very mechanisms that once saved you begin to imprison you. Mock's a very common example. Many people who grew up too fast become extremely independent. That sounds like a good thing, but look deeper. They are not just independent. They do not believe that anyone is truly there for them. So they do everything alone, solve problems alone, endure hardship alone, get through pain alone. They may be very tired. But when someone asks, do you need help? Their response is almost automatic. It's okay. I'm fine. Does that sound familiar? I'm fine. Many people say that sentence hundreds of times in life, but for children who had to grow up too fast, it is almost like armor, because when they were little, showing weakness usually did not bring help. It might bring disappointment, silence, or even irritation. So they learned one thing: if I take care of myself, I will not get hurt more. But the cost of that extreme independence is very great. It makes you not know how to be loved. Not because you do not want to be loved, but because when someone truly tries to care for you, a part of you feels unfamiliar with it. You may doubt them, you may feel indebted to them, or you may unconsciously push them away, not because they are wrong, but because real intimacy makes you feel out of control. Imagine someone who has always had to be strong since childhood. If one day someone says to them, "You can be weak in front of me," that sounds beautiful, but to them it is also frightening because they were never allowed to do that. And so many adults who grew up too fast fall into a paradox. They are very good at taking care of others, but they do not know how to take care of themselves. Or they can sit for hours listening to friends talk. They can offer very deep advice. They can see other people's pain very clearly. But when it is their turn, they say, "It's nothing." Some even become the therapist of the entire friend group. People always come to them when there is a problem. People trust them, but almost no one asks who is listening to you. This is one of the greatest lonelinesses of people who grew up too fast. They are always there for other people, but very rarely is anyone there for them. And sometimes they do not even know that they need that. Another thing that often happens is the feeling of emptiness. It sounds hard to understand. How can a person with a good job, a stable life, and the respect of many people still feel empty? But it happens very often. Because when you spend your whole childhood becoming the person others need, you may grow up without truly knowing who you are. You know how to please other people. You know how to work hard. You know how to be useful. But when you are alone and no one needs you to be strong anymore, a very strange question begins to appear. Who am I really? There are people who achieve a great deal in life, but when they come home at night, they feel a void that no achievement can fill. That is not greed. That is the inner child speaking up. The child who has been overlooked for too long. The child who was never asked, "What do you want?" They were only asked, "How can you help?" And so many adults live as if they are performing a role. The role of the good child. The role of the good employee. The role of the reliable friend. They perform it very well, so well that sometimes they themselves believe in the role, but deep inside there is still a small voice, a voice they have tried to silence for many years. It does not scream. It only whispers one question. Was I ever allowed to simply be a child? There is something many people misunderstand about childhood. They think childhood is something that has ended, like an old chapter in a book, a phase that has passed. You grow up and everything is behind you. But in psychology, that is not entirely true. Childhood does not really disappear. It becomes the foundation of who you are. Every way you react to the world, every way you love, every way you fear is shaped by those early years. And for people who had to grow up too soon, there is often something very particular inside them. A child who never got to live at the age they actually were. In psychology, this is often called the inner child, the child within. Not in an imaginary sense, but as a very real part of your mind. It is where your earliest memories of safety are stored, of fear, of love, of feeling accepted or abandoned. And if that child grew up in an environment where they had to become strong too early, then a part of them will be frozen at that point in time. Imagine this. An 8-year-old child standing in the kitchen while their parents argue. They cannot do anything. They cannot leave. They cannot solve the problem. They can only stand there and try to make things a little less bad. Maybe they say something to soften the atmosphere. Maybe they stay quiet. Maybe they hug their mother while she cries. But in that moment, one part of them had to grow up, and another part of them got stuck there. When that child becomes an adult, the adult part may function very well. They go to work, they pay bills, they take care of people. But the child part inside is still waiting for something it never received. Safety. That is why sometimes an adult can react very strongly to things that seem small. A cold sentence, an unanswered message, someone they love suddenly becoming distant. To others, that may seem normal, but to them, it can touch a very old fear, the fear of being abandoned, the fear that love can disappear at any moment. Because when they were little, love in their family was often unstable. Some days were peaceful, some days were tense, some days everything felt normal, some days everything felt like it was about to collapse. And so, with their nervous system learned one thing: love is uncertain. As they grow older, that can appear in relationships in very subtle ways. A person may love very deeply, but also be afraid to love. They may care very much about others, but always prepare for the possibility that one day that person will leave. So they try to control everything. They try to please the person they love, try not to cause trouble, try to become what the other person needs. But sometimes they do not realize that they are repeating the very thing that happened in childhood. Once again, they become the one responsible for other people's emotions. Once again, they become the one keeping everything from falling apart. And after a while, they begin to feel exhausted, not because they do not love, but because they are used to loving by sacrificing themselves. Well, yeah, there is a very common story, a person who is always taking care of everyone. Their family relies on them. Their friends rely on them. Their partner relies on them. They are the person everyone calls when something happens. But one day, they sit alone in their room, and they realize something very painful. No one truly knows how tired they are. No one truly knows how sad they are, because they have spent their whole life becoming the strong one. This is the paradox of people who grew up too fast. The world looks at them and says, "You're so strong." But inside them there is still a child waiting for something very simple. Not admiration, not recognition, just one very basic feeling. To be held, to be told you don't have to be strong anymore. And perhaps the most heartbreaking part is this: so many of us grow up without ever hearing those words. There is something many people who grew up too fast carry for their whole lives but rarely say out loud. A very quiet feeling that somehow they are not truly worthy of being loved. It sounds extreme, but think about it carefully. If, when you were little, you only received attention when you were well behaved, if you were only praised when you were helpful, if you were only noticed when you did everything right, then your brain learns a very clear lesson. Love is not something you receive just because you exist. Love is something you have to earn. And so many children grow up with a very deep belief: I have to become useful for people to need me. This follows them into adulthood in very subtle ways. They become people of enormous value in the eyes of others. They work hard, and they are always ready to help. They are always reliable. But inside them there is still a small question they do not dare to say out loud. If one day I can no longer do all these things, will anyone still stay? There was once a man who told a very real story. He was the one his whole family always relied on. He helped his parents solve financial problems. He was the friend everyone called when they were struggling. At work, he was the one his boss always trusted. Anyone looking at him would think, this man is so strong. But one evening, after a long day, he sat in his car before walking into the house, and he realized something that surprised him. He could not remember the last time anyone had asked him one very simple question: are you tired? Not because people were bad, but because he always looked like the kind of person who never needed help. This is one of the biggest psychological traps for children who had to mature too early. They become too good at controlling themselves, too good at hiding pain, too good at keeping everything stable, so good that the whole world begins to believe they need no one. But the truth is the opposite. They need love just like anyone else. They just do not know how to ask for it. Because when they were little, Asking for attention usually did not bring results. It might bring disappointment or silence, or the familiar sentence, "You need to be understanding." And so they learn another strategy. Do not ask, just become useful. If I am good enough, if I work hard enough, if I am strong enough, then maybe people will stay. But this creates a very painful loop. The more they try to prove their value, the more they feel that the love they receive is conditional. A woman may be in a relationship for many years. She does everything for the person she loves, caring, attending, sacrificing. But deep inside, she always feels that she has to keep this relationship working, that if she stops trying, everything may collapse. This is when childhood begins to rewrite the script of adulthood. When you were little, you learned that your job was to keep the family stable. And now, in relationships, you unconsciously keep doing the same thing. You become the mediator, the responsible one, the one who tries harder. But after a while, another feeling begins to appear. Resentment, not because you do not love the other person, but because a part of you is beginning to get tired. A part of you begins to think, "Oh, why do I always have to be the one trying harder?" And this is where many people feel confused. They do not understand why they are both in love and exhausted inside that very relationship. The answer usually lies deep in the past, because when you grow up with the belief that love must be earned, you may spend your whole life proving your worth. But there is a truth many people realize very late. You cannot earn what should have been given freely. Real love is not a reward for doing well. It is something you deserve simply because you exist. But to believe that, many people have to go back and face a very old part of themselves. The part of the child who once thought, "If I don't hold everything together, no one will." At some point in life, many people who grew up too fast begin to feel something very strange. Everything on the outside may still look fine. Work is fine. Life is fine. People around them still think they are strong. But inside, a deep exhaustion begins to appear. Not the kind of tiredness that comes from a long work day, but a kind of tiredness that is very hard to name, as if you have had to hold everything together for too long. It may begin with very small signs. You begin to feel irritated by the things you used to always do for other people. You begin to notice that you burn out more easily. You begin to realize that you are always the one listening, but hardly anyone listens to you. And sometimes, in a very quiet moment, an unexpected feeling appears. Sadness. No clear reason why, no clear source. Just a very old sadness that seems to have been there for a very long time. That is often the moment when the inner child begins to speak, not through words, but through feeling. Some people say they suddenly cry when they hear a song. Some cry when they see a child being hugged by their parents. Some simply sit alone and feel an enormous emptiness. At that moment, they often think, "Why do I feel like this? My life isn't even that bad." But the truth is, that feeling does not come from the present. It comes from the years you never had time to feel. Because when you were little, you were too busy surviving. You had to stay calm. You had to be understanding. You had to be strong. There was not much room to be sad. There was not much room to be angry. There was not much room to say, "I'm scared too." So all of those emotions did not disappear. They just waited until you grew up. I waited until your life became stable enough for them to appear. That is why so many people begin the healing process, not when they are young, but when they are already adults. When they begin to ask themselves questions they never dared to ask before. Why do I always feel like I have to be strong? Why is it so hard for me to believe that someone truly loves me? Why do I always feel like I have to do more than everyone else? Those questions often lead you to a very deep truth. that for most of your life you have been living in survival mode. Survival mode. In that mode, you do not live to enjoy. You live to keep everything from falling apart. You control emotions, you control behavior, you try to predict things before they happen. That helped you get through childhood. But when you continue to live that way in adulthood, when it begins to become an invisible cage, you may achieve a great deal of success, but you still feel like you cannot truly breathe. You are always tense, always alert, always preparing for something bad to happen. And sometimes what surprises people most of all is this: they do not know how to rest, not just sleep, but the feeling that you are allowed to let go. Some people sit watching a movie, but their mind is still thinking about responsibilities. Some people go on vacation, but still feel guilty, because deep inside they still carry a very old belief: maybe I should be doing something useful. This is when something very important begins to happen. The child inside you does not want to stay silent anymore. They begin asking questions you never used to let yourself hear. Why do I always have to be the strong one? Or why did no one ever ask if I was okay? Why was it that when I was little, no one protected me? These questions can be very painful. Many people try to avoid them. They become busier. They work more. They fill their life with responsibilities. But the truth is that child will not disappear, because they are not the problem. They are a part of you that needs to be seen. And sometimes the first step in healing is not fixing your life. It is stopping and finally admitting one very simple thing. What I went through was not easy. There is a moment in the journey of growing up that many people never talk about. A very quiet moment. No background music, no one standing beside you, encouraging you, just you, and a truth you finally begin to realize. No one is going to go back into the past and save the child you used to be. It sounds cruel, but actually, it is the beginning of freedom, because so many of us, even after becoming adults, still carry a very quiet hope. A hope that one day someone will see the pain we hid. Someone will understand us. Someone will say the words we never got to hear when we were little. That you did not deserve that. You were just a child. You did not need to be that strong. We may wait a very long time for those words. Some wait for them from their parents. Some wait for them from a partner. Some wait for them from friends. But many times in life, those words never come from anyone else, and that is when a very deep shift happens. You begin to realize that the only one who can go back and take that child's hand is you. It may sound strange, but in psychology, this is a very important step in the healing process. Or you begin to look back at your past, not to blame, but to understand. You begin to look at the memories you always used to avoid. The days when you had to stay quiet while everything felt tense. The times you tried to make the adults happy. The times you were scared but did not dare say it. And for the first time in your life, you look at that child with a very different gaze. Not a judging gaze, not a blaming gaze, but tenderness. You begin to see that child did something extraordinary. They survived, they adapted. They did the best they could with what they had. An 8-year-old child should not have had to understand so much about adult sorrow. A 9-year-old child should not have had to keep peace for the whole family. A 10-year-old child should not have had to feel that everything would collapse if they were not strong. Why, but you did it. And when you realize that, a very strange feeling may appear. Grief. Not because you are weak, but because you begin to understand that you lost things you should have had. Carefree days, being held when you were afraid, moments when you were simply a child. This is when many people feel a deep sadness. They may cry for what has passed, they may feel angry, they may feel pain, but what matters is this: that is not breaking down, that is awakening. because for many years you had to freeze a part of your emotions in order to survive, and now they are beginning to thaw. So this process is not easy. It is not like the positive quotes online, not the kind that says, just think more positively, be stronger. Real healing is sometimes very messy. Some days you feel strong, some days you feel like a child again. And some days you feel yourself progressing, some days you feel like you are back at the beginning. But one important thing happens through all of it. You begin to stay beside yourself. Instead of abandoning your feelings the way you used to, you begin to listen to them. Instead of saying, I shouldn't feel this way, you begin to say, I understand why I feel this way. This is exactly the moment when many people experience something new for the first time. Not strength, but softness with themselves. And sometimes the most healing thing a person who grew up too fast can do is simply say one sentence to the child within. A sentence they have waited a very long time to hear. I see you now. Your pain is real. And this time I am not leaving you. There is a very common misunderstanding that many people carry throughout their lives. They think there is something wrong with them, that they are too sensitive, too anxious, or too exhausted in relationships, or too unable to believe that someone truly loves them. And so they often say to themselves things like, maybe something is wrong with me. Maybe I overthink too much. Maybe I should be stronger. But the truth is much deeper. Most of the things you call problems were once the ways you survived. Your vigilance once helped you avoid bursts of anger. Your silence once helped you keep peace in a tense household. Your early maturity once helped you get through years when no one truly protected you. Those things are not signs that you are broken. They are signs that you adapted. You did what many children in that situation had to do. You became strong before you had time to be fragile. And now, as an adult, perhaps you are beginning to realize that those mechanisms no longer serve you. You do not need to always be vigilant. You do not need to always be the one holding everything together. You do not need to always be the strongest person in the room. But learning how to live differently does not happen in one day, because your nervous system learned those lessons over many years. It needs time to understand that now you are safer, that not every room is a battlefield, that not every relationship is about to collapse, that you can breathe without preparing for the next storm. And perhaps the most important thing many people begin to learn is a very simple skill: allowing themselves to rest, not just sleeping more, but allowing themselves not to prove anything, allowing themselves to have imperfect days, allowing themselves to say, I'm tired today, allowing themselves to say, I need help. When those things may sound small, but for someone who had to grow up too fast, they can be very big steps. Because in the past, you believed your value came from how much you could do. But when healing begins, you slowly learn a different truth. Your value does not come from how strong you are, not from how many people you help, not from how much hardship you can endure. Your value simply comes from one thing: you exist, and that is enough. Sometimes when you begin to treat yourself with that kind of tenderness, something very beautiful happens. The child inside you begins to breathe again. You can see it in very small moments, when you laugh for no reason, when you allow yourself to rest without feeling guilty, when you say no without being afraid of abandonment. When you realize that you no longer need to carry the whole world on your shoulders. That is not weakness. That is real maturity. Not the kind of maturity you were forced to learn when you were little, but the kind of maturity that comes from understanding and compassion for yourself. Maybe you did not have a peaceful childhood. Maybe you had to grow up faster than you ever should have had to. But that does not mean your story ends there, because life is not written only in the first years. It is written in every choice you make afterward, in the way you treat yourself, in the way you allow yourself to live differently. And perhaps for the first time in your life, you begin to grow up in a completely new way. Not because you have to, not because you were forced to be strong, but because you choose to become whole. You are not broken. Eyes, you never were broken. You were only a child who had to learn how to survive too early. And now you are learning how to truly live